Hi there, it's Kristen from k.becca, and have you ever found yourself in a situation where just the right product comes along at just the right time? This happened to me recently when Silhouette released a bunch of new specialty media products that you can cut with Silhouette's line of digital die cutting machines, and probably other brands of die cutting machines too. A lot of the new products caught my eye, and I'm planning on sharing some of them with you in upcoming videos, but the one that I really zoomed in on was the reusable adhesive stencil material. I've had a number of projects in mind lately that involve watercoloring over a masked area, and up until now I've had trouble finding a material that would temporarily adhere to the surface of cardstock without allowing watercolor or other types of wet media to bleed or soak through under the masked area. Liquid Frisket is a great option for masking with watercolor, but when you use it, you have to hand paint the shape that you want to be masked, and that isn't easy or quick to do if you're talking about more complex shapes. So when I saw that Silhouette had released an adhesive stencil material, I ordered it immediately so I could see whether it would give me the results that I'm looking for. The stencil material and I got off to kind of a bumpy start. It's on the thick side, which is nice because it's good quality and doesn't rip or tear easily, but I did initially have some issues cutting cleanly through the material. My blade was on the dull side, and after I switched it out with a new blade, I was able to cut cleanly through the material with a blade setting of 10, which is the deepest blade setting for a regular ratchet blade, and I had to double cut it twice, so a total of 4 passes with the die cutting machine. And you can see that once I figured out the blade setting and number of passes to get a clean cut, the stencil material cut the shape beautifully, even the thinner lines and smaller interior pieces of the letters. When I cut this, my machine didn't cut through the protective backer paper, so I just peeled the shape off of the backer paper as I removed it from the sheet of stencil material after I cut it. I also like that the stencil material is blue because you can easily see exactly where it is on your cardstock as you're working. I'm going to set the die cut aside for now, and I'm going to take a piece of Canson watercolor paper that I've cut to 4 1/4 inches wide by 5 1/2 inches tall and tape that down onto my work surface on all 4 sides using painter's tape so the cardstock doesn't move around or warp too much once I start watercoloring. Then I'm going to take the shape that I die cut earlier from the stencil material and press it in place slightly above center on the piece of cardstock. You want to be sure that there are no air pockets around the edges for watercolor to seep under, so firmly press down all over the shape before moving on to the next step. For this project, I'll be using a set of watercolors from Shinhan. I've been using these for about a year, and I really like working with them. I am by no means a watercolor pro, but I think that the Shinhan watercolors are very good quality for what I use them for, and they're a great price at a little less than $30 for the set of 30 tubes. The palette that I have for these paints is the Mijello Silver Nano 40 palette, which costs almost as much as the paints. But I like that it has a lot of room for mixing colors and extra space for new paints if I want to add them. I actually have Winsor & Newton Cotman Indigo and Mijello Mission Burnt Sienna in the palette with the Shinhan watercolors since there was room for them. Okay, back to the project. Since I'm testing the adhesive stencil material to see whether the watercolor will seep under at all, I want to add quite a bit of water to the paper, especially around the area where the stencil mask is. Once the paper is thoroughly soaked, it's time to start painting. The colors that I'll be using are vermilion hue, peacock green, and Prussian blue, which is one of my favorite color combos lately. I'm using a sort of medium-sized round brush for this project, and I'll go in first with the vermilion hue, which is a great reddish-orange color. I'll paint from the top left corner across the top and down into part of the masked area with the color. Then I'll rinse my brush and pick up some of the peacock green and continue painting. I'll add some water so the 2 colors start mixing a little bit. I don't want them to mix too much because the colors will start to become muddy, but I do want some mixing in the area where the colors overlap. Then I'll continue to paint with the peacock green over the masked area and down until about 1/3 of the paper isn't painted. And I'll add some more water and start to draw a little bit of that peacock green down before I move on to my last color, which is Prussian blue. I want to deepen the Prussian blue even further, so I'll add a little bit of black watercolor to make that happen. Using black watercolor is considered taboo by some watercolor artists who prefer to create custom black hues using a mix of colors. But hey, I am an amateur, so black watercolor is totally fine by me, especially if it gives me the shade of deep blue that I want. When I'm done mixing the deep blue, I'll add it to the remaining unpainted area of the paper, and I'll also mix it a little in the area where it borders the peacock green. I'll add more water to get more mixing going on between the two colors. And I'll also come in as needed with a dry paper towel to absorb any excess water or areas where the color is pooling. I want to come in with a second layer of watercolor after this first layer is dry. I could let it air dry, but I want to test the stencil material to see if it's affected at all by a heat tool, so that's what I'll use to quickly dry this layer. The great news is that the stencil material doesn't seem to be affected by the heat tool at all. The bad news is that I messed up the paint in an area where I stuck my finger to test whether the paint was dry. It wasn't. Smooth move, Kristen. It's no biggie though, since I can easily cover that area up when I apply a second layer of watercolor. For this second layer, I don't want to use quite as much water because I want to deepen the color and add contrast. I'll come back in with the Prussian blue and start painting in the bottom right corner and across the bottom of the paper. When I'm happy with how that area looks, I'll start painting a second layer of the peacock green, mixing it with the Prussian blue in the area where the two colors meet. I don't want the lines between the colors to be too defined, so I'll add water where needed to soften those lines. Finally, I'll come back in with a little bit of vermilion hue in the area where it overlaps with the peacock green, and I'll add a little more water to soften the lines between the first and second layers of vermilion hue. When I'm finished painting, I'll use the heat tool again to dry everything. Once the paper is dry, I want to add one more detail to finish the design. I have some white acrylic paint here that I've thinned with a little bit of water. I'll load a round paintbrush with the paint, and I'll hold the brush over the paper and firmly tap the handle to add little splatters of paint over the front of the card and give the design a little bit more contrast and texture. Now, if I hadn't added the acrylic paint, I would remove the stencil mask right now. But I don't want to risk smearing the paint, so I'll allow it to dry completely before I remove the mask. Okay, it's about half an hour later and the acrylic paint is completely dry, so it's time for the big reveal. Did the stencil mask protect the paper underneath? Let's find out. I'll carefully remove the mask, and it removes without any problem at all. No sticky areas or anything left behind. Things are looking good. I can't see any places where the watercolor bled underneath. Now, I'll remove the painter's tape from around the paper, and when I hold the paper closer, you can see just how excellent these results are. The lines around the mask are very clean and crisp, and I'm not noticing any bleed through at all. I think it's safe to say that the Silhouette Adhesive Material does exactly what I was hoping it would do. Don't you love it when that happens? Okay, so I still have to finish the card. First, I'll trim off the areas on each side where the painter's tape was. After that, I'll add foam tape to the back of the card front, peel the protective paper from the foam tape, and adhere the card front to the center of a top-folding A2 size card base. I have one more little tip for you before I go. Since this stencil material is reusable, you'll need a way to store the stencils and masks that you cut. You can use a sheet of acetate for this, or even the slick surface of a sheet of palette paper, but I like to use the shiny side of the protective sheets from the Silhouette cutting mats. Just stick your stencils and masks on one of the sheets and you're good to go. You can easily cut the sheets to size for single stencils or groups of stencils or masks that you want to store together, or you can leave them as one larger piece and store them that way. I always have at least a couple of these floating around in the drawer where I store my cutting mats, and you probably do too if you have a Silhouette die cutting machine. And now we have something that we can use them for when our cutting mats run out of sticky and we have to throw them away. Just peel off the stencil or mask when you're ready to use it and stick it on again when you're done. Let's have a look at those clean masking lines again before I go. I am so happy with how this turned out, and I'm really excited to use the Silhouette Adhesive Stencil Material for other projects too. You can find a full list of supplies used in this project in the description area below, or in the area below the video if you're watching on k.becca.com. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more projects that incorporate the Silhouette Adhesive Stencil Material, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll tune in again soon.